Previously on Bush War.
I believe that in 87, to some extent just like in 85 in the previous attempt, maybe our people underestimated the scope of future or possible South African intervention.
Dit was een aanslag, een aanmars, een offensief van Angolese VAPLA-magte met Russische raadgevers en so meer, en Russische krijgstuig op Jamba, wat in die verre suidooste van Angola was. Jamba was die hart en siel van UNITA geweest.
From August 1987, for the next 10 months, fierce battles raged almost constantly in southern Angola. This sound recording comes from a tank battle between South African armoured troops and FAPLA forces.
Ek kan onthou op 'n stadium waar ons die nag met die hoofkwartier van PZR brigade deur 4 saai se stellings gery het, waar die troepe langs hulle ratels, en dis nie ver van die vernelike stellings afgelê het, en net geslaap het, hulle nie eens wagte gehad nie, so moeg was hulle. Want daai troepe het in baie gevalle elke tweede dag 'n vernelike brigade aangevat, waar hulle waarskynlik 3-teen-1 oormag teen hulle gehad het.
Each FAPLA brigade consisted of around 1,900 men, 10 tanks and artillery. The South Africans faced these superior numbers with, among other things, the brand new G5, which had not been tested in the field at all.
Hulle reken jy kan 800 tot 1000 skote veilig vuur met die G5. Daar's iets soos hulle noem CFC's. Dis die weer in die loop. En ons kanonne wat ons daar gehad het, omdat jy so ver was, met hulle deurgedruk tot 1500, selfs 1600 skote op 'n kanon. En wat dan gebeur is, jou projektiel raak onstabiel, veral as hy warm is, en dan ontplof hy.
Constant MiG attacks made every day a dice with death.
Die volgende om toe skoot te klap en ons hoor die mix. Die eerste ding wat opkom is volksaus. Hardkom na versterk volksaus. Toe ons daar kom, toe is net een volksau. Hy's groot genoeg vir een man, maar 3 van ons is daarin. Soos 'n klomp sardientjies in 'n blik. En jy bid en jy verlang, daai oomblikke, daai paar oomblikke, dink jy net aan die huis. Wat gaan jy maak as jy by die huis kom? Jy dink hoe jy meisie laaste gedruk het daar op die lughawe. Hy experience haar die sagte liggaam teen jou. Dan bid jy, jy wens jy's by die huis. Jy wil nie in 'n kontak wees nie, maar jy doen dit vir jou land, vir jou meisie en vir jou kinders wat nog gaan kom.
In October, FAPLA's 47th Brigade was destroyed at the confluence of the Lomba and the Kuzizi rivers. They had expected the attack from the south and were caught off guard. On the northern front, FAPLA did not fare much better. UNITA stopped the 15th Brigade from taking the village of Kunjamba.
Nou toe hulle begin met die operasie, het hulle nooit eers by hulle eerste doelwit Mavinga uitgekom nie. Want by die Lomba rivier is hulle verslaan.
It is true they defeated this FAPLA force on the Lomba River using the G5, G6 guns, their force, etc., etc. And it is quite true that the Angolan air defenses, anti-aircraft system, didn't perform well.
But the end was not even nearly in sight. The focus shifted to the village of Quito, which had been under FAPLA control since 85.
Onthou die aanvanklike doel van FAPLA en die Kibane was om Mavinga en Jamba te vat. Skielik was hulle nuwe doel, en dit het 'n redelike tyd gevat voordat hulle by hierdie besluit uitgekom het om Quito Kanaal te beskerm.
En die dorpie is 'n dorpie aan die weste kant van die groot Quito rivier. En die plek staan bekend as Quito Kanaal, omdat dit die punt is waar die Kanaal rivier en die Quito rivier by mekaar uitkom. En die pragtige dorpie sit daar met 'n groot brug wat bo oor die rivier gebou is daar. En dit is dan die punt van waar die FAPLA magte dan hulle dryfoperasies gevoer het teen UNITA, wat in die suidoostelike gedeelte was. En eintlik was die strategie om die vyand vanuit ons oogpunt uit die FAPLA magte terug te dryf oor die rivier, UNITA aan hierdie kant te vestig En dan het jy mos nou 'n hindernis daartussen. En al die gebuite tanks vir UNITA te gee sodat hulle dan sterk genoeg is om dit eintlik op hulle eie te kon doen.
Unconventional forces like 3-2 were used widely during the conventional operations around Quito. 101 Battalion was equally involved.
Die verkenningsregimente was aangewend om fisies vooraf verkenning te doen. Vyandelike stellings, vyandelike artilleriestellings, uitleg van stellings, diepteikens uit te haal.
In November that year, 1987, a strategic meeting took place between Cuba, Angola, and the Soviet Union. Historian Piero Iglesias is the only outsider who has ever laid eyes on those minutes.
The context is that the Cubans come to the conclusion that the military situation of the FAPLA in southern Angola is desperate, that Quito is likely to fall if nothing happens. That would be a terrible blow to the Angolans because the best brigades of the FAPLA are there at Quito Cuanavale, and that therefore the entire negotiating position of Angola, because negotiations had already begun between Angola and the United States in July 1987, would collapse, and Angola would have to negotiate at gunpoint.
For this reason, Castro decided to play a trump card.
And Cuba, therefore, is going to send reinforcement to change the military situation. Overall, they sent about 13,000 soldiers more between November and the last arrived in August, but it's the weapons. Cuba sent, basically they stripped Cuban defenses in anti-aircraft weapons. They sent all their best planes, all the best pilots.
That was the beginning of Operation Hooper, mid-December 1987. Hooper would continue until the 20th of March 88. In January, a new intake of conscripts arrived. Hein Groenewald and Clive Holt were among them.
So ons is so stuk is ons ingelig oor wat gaan kom. Maar nooit die regte impak besef van wat regtig gaan kom nie.
So it was only once we actually got into the full operational stuff that we were then it was explained to us that this is the enemy. It consists of the FAPLA element, and the Cubans are in there too. There's Russian equipment. There's actual Russian tanks, there's Russian artillery, and that's the sort of stage you start cucking yourself a little bit.
As FAPLA retreated to Quito, they were constantly under attack from UNITA and SADF forces, who also wanted to clear the area east of Quito. On the 13th of January 88, FAPLA's 21st Brigade was attacked and forced to find cover west of the Quito River. In mid-February, the next attack was launched on FAPLA's 59th Brigade.
Ons het natuurlik kerk voor die aand gehad, so toe weet almal. Volgende dag is die dag. En dit was nogal op Valentijnsdag geweest, 14 Februarie.
The South African artillery started the battle at 7 that morning. The low cloud cover burnt off, and soon there were 4 MiGs over the attack route. Time and again, the South Africans had to find cover under the bushes. Slowly, the vehicles of 6-1 Mechanized and 4 Psy moved towards their targets. An attack by UNITA on FAPLA's 21st Brigade confused the Angolans, and they did not realize that the main attack on the 59th Brigade would come from the north. Clive Holt's group followed a tank squadron into battle. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, all hell broke loose.
If you fired upon a rifle with a normal machine gun, it would have no effect, the bullets would just bounce off.
But the incoming fire was not from normal machine guns. It was anti-aircraft fire.
Nou, hulle die luggeweer is 'n verskriklike wapen wat hulle gebruik het, wat tot 1000 rondes per minuut skiet, en dis 4 lope, so jy kan 4000 rondes per minuut skiet.
In Lieutenant Simon's command rattle, Clive could follow the radio communication clearly. At 5:15 that afternoon, with battles raging around him in the dusk, he heard a message.
The rattle 22 Charlie got a direct hit from a 23 mm.
Hein Groenewald was in rattle 22 Charlie.
ewe skielik het die ratel net van die een kant na die ander kant beweeg en dit was wit poeier en bloed reg oor die vensters geweet en ons het geweet dis verby, ons is uitgeskiet en ons korporaal het daar was 'n klomp gekreun en alles in die ratel en hy het dadelik gesien dat ons is uitgeskiet.
On the radio, Clive heard everything.
It was like a kick in the guts. These were our own guys. There were 4 dead. And I couldn't believe it. Yeah, we'd not suffered any major casualties or loss of life up to that point. And when that came through, suddenly you feel very, very vulnerable. Because you now realise, well, this whole sort of bulletproof mentality that we'd adapted up to that point, we're only just human beings too. We are very vulnerable and here I might die.
So half verstikkend deur al die rook en so aan het ons uitgeklim. Ek kon toe niks sien nie. Toe het ek aan my linkerkant gesien dat J.J. Groenewald, hy leef gelukkig nog. Hopelik. Daar was skrapnel het deur sy hele nek gegaan. Wat ek na die tyd gehoor het millimeter sy slagare gemis. Ek het teruggehardloop na die ratel toe en toe is al die rook en goed natuurlik weg en ek het gesien dat ons uitgeskiet was en ek het gesien die ouens wat dood was binne. Het was 'n vreeslike gesig, maar ek gaan nie in detail gaan wat dit dan betref nie. Die mense is basies reg van voor af geskiet. Ja, die ouens is toe afgekasewek. Ek het besluit om watter rede ook al, ek gaan nie afgekasewek word nie.
Hein went back into the bloody chaos. He and Clive were only 2 of thousands of soldiers whose lives were in the balance in those days and weeks. Battles continued day after day with almost no respite. On the 25th and the 29th of February, FAPLA's 25th Brigade was attacked south of the Tumpo River. Here, the South Africans and UNITA ran into extensive minefields and tenacious resistance, and the attack was averted. By the 1st of March, it was called off. Talks about peace had started in February 88 already, but in the field it made no difference. In that same month, advanced Cuban teams started moving into the Cunene province in southern Angola. In the Tumpo area, the 3rd South African UNITA attack on FAPLA started on the 23rd of March. Like the previous attacks, it stalled in the face of heavy artillery fire and dogged resistance. FAPLA held on to their position east of the Quito River. Who won and who lost the Battle of Quito Carnival is fiercely disputed to this day.
It was in the first time in the history of Africa that the Africans had to stop the South African so-called supremacy and invisibility. It was tested there.
Look, first of all, there is one thing to say. Quito is a symbol. The war was won by the Cubans, not because of Quito Carnival. Quito Carnival is a successful defense of a town.
Die Kubaanse syfers wat hulle verskaf het, is 52,000. Aan ons kant was daar nooit meer as omtrent 3,000 nie. Maar UNITA was ook daar, maar UNITA het nie naaste by die soort van wapentuig gehad wat die Angolese gehad het nie, wat hulle van die Russe af en Kubane afgekry het nie. Dit is eintlik 'n ongelooflike oorwinning wat die Suid-Afrikaners daar behaal het, iets wat 'n mens amper nie kan glo as 'n mens na die syfers kyk en na die kruistuig.
The South African side maintains that capturing Quito was never the aim.
Die doel was om die magte terug te dryf oor die rivier en om die gebied vir UNITA te gee.
Video material from the SADF archives indicates that there was a perception among the weary foot soldiers that Quito had to be taken.
Ja, jy weet wat my dan in die moere maak, is nou hierdie beloftes. Daai generaal my sê, vertrou ons manne soos ons julle vertrou. Nou maak hulle beloftes en hulle kom niks na nie. En al daai dinge, jy weet, soos ek het gesê, is die laaste aanval. Soos hulle het oor die brug het, hoe kan trek ons terug. Nou wil Quito vat en al daai stront, né.
with any battle, with any war, there's always going to be somebody saying we won, somebody saying we lost or you lost or whatever it is. I think with Quito, on one hand, the Cubans celebrated as a massive victory in that they saying that they defeated the South African Defence Force at Quito because we did not continue any further than crossing the bridge and going into Quito. We basically turned around at that point and went back. So yeah, it probably would have appeared that we turned around and run away.
They never come to an explanation why their attacks on the East River, on the Eastern Bridgehead failed, because they failed. Quito Cuanavale was a psychological defeat for South Africa. They had been talking of the fall of Quito Cuanavale. UNIT had been announcing the fall of Quito Cuanavale. Quito Cuanavale did not fall, and that was a psychological blow.
As to who won the Battle of Quito, I suppose that depends on each person's criteria as to what constitutes a military victory.
No, there were no victors. That's the point. I mean, what you had was a stalemate in southern Angola. In order to get out of Angola, Fidel Castro raised the ante by doubling the number of forces he had in Angola. He didn't double the number of troops in 87, 88 in order to attempt a victory and march into Windhoek. That was not his purpose. He doubled the ante in order to make it clear that he had a military option, but he'd prefer not to exercise it.
Quito Cuanavale is van geen belang nie. Dit is maar 'n skepping van veral Fidel Castro. As ek dit vir jou kan verduidelik, onthou ons praat van die tydperk van die Koue Oorlog. In die tydperk van die Koue Oorlog was die grootste en hewigste en uitgebreidste sielkundige oorlogvoering, propaganda en allerlei sulke triks ooit in oorlogvoering. En die oorlog in die bos in Angola was deel van daardie Koue Oorlog.
On the 3rd of May, diplomats from South Africa and Cuba met in London for the first time.
I think this thing was ripening, and it was ripening because of the realities on the ground. This was a costly stalemate. It was costing more.
Chester Crocker would play a key role in the negotiations over the following months.
So this was like for us to watch the Cubans and South Africans in that time period was like watching two scorpions in a bottle, trying to get out of the bottle without stinging each other and killing each other. And they did eventually get out of the bottle without killing each other. But there were a few minor skirmishes, and of course a protracted artillery duel at Quito Cuanavale and a few other events, but nothing major compared to what it could have been.
More soldiers died. The three parties met once more on the 24th and 25th of June in Cairo. The exchange grew heated.
En hulle begin die Cairo meeting, ontmoeting, met dit was 'n rasket van Cuba met 'n aggressiewe, onmanierlike, mislike aanval op Suid-Afrika, ons geskiedenis. Ons is, you are the imperialist, colonialist, capitalist. You have always oppressed the blacks. You've always been puppets of the imperialists. So gaat hy nou aan.
Botha interrupted him and said if that was going to be the tenor of the conversation, they might as well adjourn.
Toe is hy mekaar en ons middagete en ek en my spanne. Ons het 'n drankie gedrink daarbo in die pub. En daar was die Cubane ook so aan die hoek en Rasket kom so ewe met 'n stywe dop whisky na my toe aangestap. En hy sê vir my, there's just one thing, Minister, that I would like to bring to your attention. We are planning to introduce 10,000 more Cuban troops within the next 3 months.
And I guess you could say it was a bit of a macho test, and there were rhetorical flourishes and rhetorical exchanges on both sides, and you had the impression that Senior Risket was saying to Minister Botha, you know, if you think you're going to push us around, you don't know the real tenor of the Cuban people. You really don't know what we're like and what we're capable of. And Pukbota, who was always pretty good at these kinds of rhetorical exchanges, would respond in kind and say, "Let's finish this outside. Why don't you come outside and we'll take the gloves off."
En ek glimlag toe breed. And so, well, in that case, we will send in 1,000 South African troops. En toe bars hy uit van woede, want hy reken toe, sy 10,000 sal deur ons 1,000, jy weet, kaf gemaak word. En dit is toe natuurlijk 'n gruwelike belediging. En ek sê toe vir hom, but look, don't get so upset. You have at the present moment more than 50,000 troops. And I don't think South Africa ever had more than about 3,000. We have never tried to match you in numbers. We tried to match you in our tactics and in the superiority of our fighting abilities. En toe kan ek nou sien, hy sties een bietjie terug. Toe sê ek vir hom, but by the way, you know we can both be winners. He said, what do you mean? Ek gooi hom 'n stywe dop, soms so uit die borrel. En ek sê vir hom, look, your problem is withdrawal. You cannot withdraw. Fidel Castro, your leader, will not allow withdrawal unless you withdraw in an honorable way in which he does not lose face. And if there is a certain amount of respect or a feeling of victory or accomplishment attached to it, then it opens your way to withdraw. To say, and what makes you think that you will ever do that which will make it possible for us to withdraw? They say, well, I will tell the whites of South Africa, my voters, that look, I got rid of the Cuban troops, and now we can have independence for Namibia. En die ou kyk my so. They said, did you mean this? Ek said, I mean it. And they said, let's meet a few hours later, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. En ja, en pragtig laatmiddag, toe sê hy vir my, let's talk.
Before these advances could have an impact at the front, many more soldiers would die. Next week on Bush War, Cuba strikes a final blow. Peace is declared. SWAPO comes close to making a fatal mistake, but Namibia is born.